It was an unsettling feeling. Marley was still in the street before the inn, but it had taken on a queer, one-dimensional quality. No, that wasn't quite right. It wasn't flat so much as theatrical. You know how it is when you watch a play, no matter the skill of the set makers, you're still aware of the essential artifice of the scene. The street he stood in now was such a set. The other streets beyond were nothing more than marks on roughly painted backcloth. He looked up and, impossibly high, saw the bar that the sky was hung on, and in the blackness, shadows of machinery and other impossibilities beyond. As he looked, he saw where the painted pavement gave way to the boards. The backcloth became plain and then stopped, and the chains that weighted the whole lot down. He looked back in the inn. Painted on the window was an image of Scrooge frozen in the act of peering at a questionable piece of food on the end of a fork. "It's not real," he said. "None of it's real." "Of course it is," said the young woman as she bustled past him. It's not quite the same kind of real that you might have thought it was. This way." She led him through dark curtains and out into a claustrophobic maze of corridors, doors, and stairs. These they followed seemingly at random and at a dizzying pace. Sometimes they passed an opening that gave out onto other stages, like the one they'd entered through. There were schoolhouses, shabby offices, hovels, and low places, all rendered in canvas and paint, of course. "This place is a veritable rabbit warren," thought Marley. I don't know your name," he said as he passed some half-painted pieces of wood that from the front made themselves out to be gravestones. "No, happen you don't," she said without breaking a stride. "If you must have a name to call me, then you can use Linton." "Mrs. Linton?" "Miss," said Marley. "Linton. Just Linton," came the terse reply. Suddenly she stopped walking. So suddenly, in fact, that Marley nearly barreled into her. "Ah, Madam Crowle," Linton said into the darkness. "I have another customer for you." Then all at once, a figure started to coalesce out of the blackness. An ancient beldam, crooked in stature and bedecked in satins and velvets she was. Her eyes, as big as saucers, fixed on Marley malevolently. Her gnarled face was rouged and powdered, and her hands, like knotted stumps of wood, clenched like rats' claws. Marley imagined those terrible hands reaching up into his eye sockets and scrabbling about for the eyeballs therein, and he gave out an involuntary cry. "Ah!" "Madam Crowle," Linton said to the older woman, "this is our Marley." The visage of Madam Crowle underwent a spectacular change. Incredulity swept across it like an emotional tidal wave. "This is not our Marley," she spat out in staccato rage. "There has been a change of plan," said Linton evenly. "I see that," said Crowle. "What happened to Sir Simon? Was it nerves again? I'll give him nerves." "No, for once it wasn't our precious flower. It were the boss this time. He decided he wanted to go with authenticity for some reason," said Linton. At this, Madam Crowle gave a huge theatrical sigh. "Look, Crowle, don't get at me. I'm just the messenger. This has buggered me up as much as it has you. His first entrance is probably only a few minutes away, and I haven't even briefed him yet. Thank God it's just a jump scare." "Eh? Thank heavens for small mercies," said the old woman, suddenly conspiratorial. "Come on then, let me have a look at him." Madam Crowle scuttled up to Marley and appraised him sceptically. He could feel her two great glassy eyes assessing him as her hands pinched and pecked at his clothes like enraged sparrows. "No, he looks nothing like Marley at all. It's terrible casting," she said. Marley boggled at this. No one had ever said he didn't look like himself. "You see, it's all wrong," she said. I had Marley in something much more winding sheet than this." "I suppose it's too much to ask that you have your own winding sheet." She put her head on a slant like an impatient toucan. "No, I don't think I..." Marley was about to say, but he was cut off. "No, Of course not. Why would you have your own winding sheet? I mean, you're only a ghost. They expect me to provide everything for them nowadays. I remember a time when every self-respecting spirit would have his own winding sheet. Winding sheet, death mask, and character shoes. Oh, her hands flew up, fluttering in the air with exasperation. Well, he won't fit into Simon Schmatter, that's for certain. It'll look like a seal on him. It'll all have to be taken in, she said. Her long nails, all cut into points like little needles themselves, thought Marley, clicked together impatiently as she talked. Oh, and that's the other thing, said Linton. He's moved old Ben off present and put St. Simon in his place. More costumes! More! She screeched. Impossible, Linton! This is just impossible! Well, we have to make it possible. What about what he's wearing now, said Linton. Go out in civvies. Under no circumstances. I've never heard of such a thing. Madam Crowell, said Linton, don't say anything, Lily. Now, if you want him all dollied up, I expect you to do it yourself. I'm off to take this up with his bloody lordship himself. I can't work miracles all in one night. Madam Crowell stalked off back into the gloom. I think she likes you, said Linton to Marley with a smile. A scratchy voice came out of nowhere. Overture and beginners. Please get ready, saints and sinners. Mr. Marley to his premier entrance at the door. There was a gust of wind and a feeling of wings fluttering. Mr. Marley, first position, said the voice. Yes, thank you, we're on our way, said Linton up into the empty air. Mr. Marley, your rendition. Something large and black swooped low over their heads. With me, quickly, said Linton, and grabbed Marley by the hand and ran. May it make you worthy to be called a troubadour, only this and nothing more. The voice receded into an echo that sounded like the cry of a bird. Through the dusty corridors they hurried until they were at the threshold of another of those dark spaces. This set was very Spartan indeed. Just a platform with 3 rough steps running up to it. On top of the platform there was a door standing in a frame facing a large red curtain. Linton indicated that they were to be very quiet as they stepped into the stage area. Marley could not help himself but wonder what kind of audience might be out there beyond the curtain. Whoever they were blessed quiet. There were no sounds of sweet papers or excited muffled chatter, but audience there was. He could feel the anticipation pulling at him. Linton indicated that he was to go up on the platform, but as he placed his foot upon the first step, he stopped. No, I don't know what I'm to do, he said. Linton scowled and whispered back, don't worry. This is easy bit. I'll be through it. Have I got any lines, he said. Linton half smiled at him. Not as such, she said, and gently pushed him in the small of his back to encourage him up the steps. Finally, they took the place behind the door. Marley worried about the staging of the scene. Surely, if he was to give some kind of performance, he'd not be able to be seen with the door between him and the audience. Before he could give voice to this, Linton muttered one word. Showtime. And the curtain began to rise. There was the sound of a lonely pair of feet trudging towards the door. Marley's stomach was in knots, but Linton took his hand in hers and whispered to him, Ready? Her kindness steadied him as the footsteps stopped and were replaced by the sound of a key working in the lock of the door. Well, he said. Good, said Linton. And suddenly she pushed the hand she was holding up, round, and into the small of his back. Then she grabbed the back of his head and, with remarkable strength, pushed his head forwards and towards the door. It was a move that the prize fighters in Cheapside would have been proud of. Marley was sure that she meant to dash his head against the door. The rough wood of the door's back rushed towards him. He braced himself for the impact, which did not come. His head passed clean through the wood of the door and out the other side. And who was he nose to nose with once again but his old partner, Scrooge? Scrooge! Bog-eyed, in muffler and top hat. This time, though, Scrooge could evidently see him, as an expression somewhere between shock and horror met Marley's disembodied head as it stuck out of the door. Marley could taste brass polish as he tried to free himself. However, Linton held him like a vice. Scrooge, who had initially recoiled at the sudden sight of Marley, moved back towards him to examine the sudden appearance of his partner's face in the place of the accustomed door knocker. It was at this point that Marley felt something slam down viciously upon his foot and pain shoot up his leg in response. Marley howled, and Scrooge stumbled backwards on the no doubt treacherously icy steps. The next he knew, Marley was being pulled slowly back through the door, passing through the brass of the door knocker, then through the wood, till he was back in the stage area with the vast red curtain descending. He was struck by a pain in his face, the part that had been pushed through the door. He had been a great drinker by the end of his life, but had never experienced in all his days a hangover as keen and sharp as this. Linton's face swam back into focus through the pain. "Not bad," she said. "I'm guessing the old goat got a fair fright there and no mistake." Marley tried to speak, but all that came out was a desperate moan. "Come on," she said. "Don't know about you, but I'm dying for a cup of tea." And she strode off towards the labyrinthine corridors, forcing Marley to follow. At least, thought Marley, as he trotted along behind and attempted to wind a tatter of cloth around his aching face, things can't get much worse. How wrong he was. How very, very wrong poor Marley was.